for the Seward County Attorney's Office. Before we start, oh, feel free, come on up. Before we start, I just want to state that there was reviews that were done, information was brought forward. I think everybody has acknowledged some of the challenges that we faced. We've made some modifications, and I just want to make sure that everybody is in agreement that we've decided to work together, all of us, Sheriff's Office, Board, Attorney's Office, and today I hope that we have a productive conversation in figuring out how we're going to move forward. So, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you guys could just introduce yourselves for the record.
Copies. My name is Tom Nesbitt. I'm the owner of Nesbitt and Associates. With me is Matt Sutter, an associate of ours that works with us as well. And Matt was the overall person responsible for the audits that the commissioners hired us to do. And so we have some presentations here, and we thought that what we would do is since there's two complete audits, one on the county attorney's office, one on the sheriff's office, that we would do them separate so we could keep them separate. And so what we'll do first is, unless you had, Commissioner, unless you had a certain way you wanted to do this, or if we can just take off and go for it.
So on the agenda, it's just listed as, we're going to do the review the audit for the attorney's office first, and then followed by the sheriff's office.
Oh, okay, so you got it on the agenda. I didn't see the agenda. Sorry.
It's okay. Got it.
All right, so anyway, I'm going to do the county attorney asset audit that we did, and the purpose of the audit was conducted at the request of the commissioners. The scope of it was from July 1st, 2023 through February 28, 2025. And the objectives that we did is review the financial activity of the county attorney's drug seizure asset forfeiture accounts, verified the compliance with state and federal asset forfeiture requirements, as well as determine whether expenditures were necessary, appropriate, and transparent. The background of it is that the county attorney's office receives asset forfeiture revenue through two federal accounts: the Treasury account 2410, which is ICE related proceeds, and the Justice one 2411, which is DEA related proceeds as well. And these funds are restricted by law to law enforcement purposes and must supplement and not supplant the regular budget. The primary use of the funds that the county attorney's office did, the main expenditure was compensation of a special deputy county attorney that was dedicated to drug enforcement and criminal prosecutions. Those costs included the salary, the FICA contributions, as well as retirement contributions. Personnel that was supported was Ashley Dorwit, which is a special deputy county attorney, and been a full-time employee since August 10, 2020 through February 28, 2025. And the most recent pay rate that we found was $3,426.46 per pay period as well. So the audit findings, the necessity of expenses, all expenditures were reasonable and directly tied to the prosecuting and what they were responsible for. There was no supplanting of budget whatsoever in what the county attorney's office did, and no fraud or mismanagement of those funds in any way as well. The account analysis on the justice part, the 2411, the current balance was $160,827.49. And then the Treasury one 2410 had a beginning balance of $310,019.70, an ending balance of $268,887.85, and the total withdrawals were $76,672.28, which was primarily salary and the benefits. The total deposits within that account, on the Treasury account, was $345,000 and $560.13. So, the summary: overall, the county attorney has done a very good job in managing its asset forfeiture funds responsibly, and is in compliance with the laws that are put in place. And all the funds were used for legitimate, dedicated prosecutor role in drug enforcement cases. And the conclusion would be that they demonstrate a strong record of compliance and no corrective actions are required at this time for the county attorney's office. So that concludes that audit report on the county attorney's office.
Thank you. Board have any questions? Wendy, you are present. Did you want to speak on behalf of the county attorney's office or say anything? No. Okay. You were going to say something there?
Nope, I have no questions.
Okay. Seeing none, do we want to make a motion to accept the audit by chance? Might that be for the record? The audit review? It's on the agenda as discussed action.
I don't think.
We don't need one?
to. It's just information that's
Got it.
provided to.
Okay, so let's go to the next item, which is review of the independent audit of the Seward County Drug Asset Forfeiture Fund for the Seward County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, and this will be structured very similar to what Tom just presented on the county attorney's side. On the sheriff's side, our audit scope was July 1st of 2023 through April 30th of 2025. So essentially one full fiscal year and 9 months out of the second fiscal year. Our objectives in this audit, very similar to what Tom mentioned: evaluate financial activity of this drug seizure asset forfeiture fund, verify compliance with federal and state requirements, assess appropriateness and transparency of expenditures. And to give you a little background on what forfeiture funds are, Nebraska statutes 28.431 and 28.1439.02 kind of outline how these funds are governed and who's responsible for them. 28.431 specifies that the funds fall under the purview of the state auditor of public accountants. So these are public funds that are auditable at any given time. 28.1439.02 outlines the county treasurer's duties as well as the county drug law enforcement and education fund. And this is separate from the federal equitable sharing agreement that we are under this particular fund. So I want to make sure there's no confusion between those two items. The scope and the amounts received, our total expenditures that we reviewed were it's actually $1,259,034.80. And that's broken down from the HSI account of $1,087,357.44 and the DEA account of $171,677.36. Of that total, that 1.2 million, we flagged $858,563.67 for enhanced review, meaning when we saw these items on the ledgers, we had some additional questions as far as what they were for and whether or not there was a drug nexus or whether they'd be allowable expenses. And that comes out to be about 68.2% of the total. Large spending categories that we noticed were equipment repairs, equipment maintenance, technology, utilities, subscriptions, and just overall vehicle costs. So the key audit findings, there were some documentation and purpose gaps, and many of these expenses lacked clear linkage to drug enforcement education purposes. And so, examples of that would be, patrol vehicles, uniform expenses, tasers. Those are things that I'm sure are probably being used most of the time for drug enforcement, but there's no clear documentation on how many hours. If we purchase a patrol unit out of the drug seizure fund, how many hours is that vehicle being spent actually doing drug enforcement work? Or uniforms and tasers. I mean, obviously, if we have a deputy out on the side of the road dealing with the criminal element, it's nice to give them that tool, that taser to have to use for their safety. But there's no documentation on tying that back to how much that's being used in drug enforcement efforts. So that's an area that we'd like to see some improvement in. Supplanting risks. There's use of funds for reoccurring costs such as utilities, phones, uniforms, patrol vehicle maintenance. All of that stuff is typically seen coming from an operating budget in most law enforcement agencies as opposed to a seizure fund. So we believe that there's a little bit of supplanting there as far as that goes, that the the correct funding source for that would be your general operating budget and not seized funds. Cell phone usage was an issue. Personnel acknowledged the personal use on several cell phones. We also had some questions on the gigabyte usage as far as data goes. There was, I think, one or two particular phone lines that routinely had 30 to 40 gigs a month in data usage, and you know, that's pretty significant considering most of them were in that 5 to 10 range. If you break that down, if you're working 40 hours a week, 8-hour shifts, that'd be 5 shifts a week, times that by 4 weeks of the month, that's 20 working shifts. You're basically using 1 gig of data every 4 hours there, and that's pretty significant. I'm not, you know, I know I couldn't do that with my phone, so that was a question that we had, is how that's possible. School resource officers, we have salaries tied to several individuals who are earmarked as school resource officers, but we have no data to show how much time they're spending in schools or what the extent of that involvement is as far as school resource goes. So those are things that we flagged as key findings. We were also made aware towards the end of the audit of a Treasury compliance review. There was a letter dated May 30th of 2025 where the U.S. Treasury determined that $762,504.32 in equitable sharing funds were improperly expended on non-qualifying salaries from fiscal years 21 through 24. And as a result of that, the Sheriff's Office has been placed on a do not spend status until some of those funds are reconciled. So that's a whole separate audit and separate issue, but it does confirm some of the findings that we had in ours, so we wanted to make note of that. Observations on spending patterns, vehicle-related costs. There were high repair costs across the board, also vehicle outfitting, so new vehicles being taken in to be outfitted to get the necessary equipment to send them out in the field, and then also fuel expenses. Those were all coming out of the Federal Forfeiture Fund. Again, typically most of that stuff is done from an operating budget as, you know, general industry standard. There were also some questions on some of the installs. For example, we had one vehicle that we notated when taken in for the install. The price was approximately $11,900, and then subsequently the 2 other vehicles were over $22,000. So there wasn't a lot in the invoices that really explained the disparity in price there, why one was almost double the price of another. So obviously, you know, competitive bidding is generally recommended in things like this so that we can kind of control the cost of these things and hold our vendors accountable. Technology and surveillance costs, there's a significant amount spent on license plate reader systems, vehicle trackers, and forensic software. You know, again, there is probably a drug nexus to a lot of that, but we're lacking the documentation to really tie all that together. Again, uniforms and tactical gear. Again, we know that every deputy out in the field needs a certain amount of gear and uniform equipment to do their job. We'd like to see a little bit better documentation on how that ties back to the drug nexus and the justification for purchasing it out of the seizure fund. And then the SRO positions, touched on that earlier. You know, those are funded by federal seizures. However, they're deployed mostly in drug interdiction, but there's not anything accounting for that in their timesheets or any codes that we've seen that really track the data and the hours on that. The overall assessment, we don't believe there's any fraud or any intentional mismanagement identified here, but there are some things that we need to probably tighten up for auditing purposes in the future to not, you know, get yourselves in the same boat of being placed on that do not spend list again. Recommendations that we have, just some better control over documentation, who's approving the expenses, is there a competitive bidding process when spending these funds, And, you know, digitizing a lot of these records would have helped us a lot in the audit. I can say that this was about a 4-month process to get through all the documentation just because of the lack of this digitization and the ability to query these things. If things were, you know, placed into a system where we could better access it and didn't have to come in and physically image every invoice, it probably would have been closer to a 4-week job. So that would help with future audits. So, you know, again, with documentation, I think adopting some written policy here, whether at the county level or within the sheriff's office, to give the board a little bit better control, or I guess maybe control's not the term, but a little bit better insight into what's going on there. I think that would be beneficial for everyone. And then also just timekeeping, move some of those reoccurring costs such as utilities, copier leases, phones, move that to the general budget so that once the seizure funds run out, as they have in this case, you can still afford to operate and you can still afford to keep the heat on at the interdiction building down there. So those are our recommendations. With that, I would be happy to take any questions that you have of us.
Questions from the board?
Can you state your name again?
Yeah, it's Matthew Sutter. Sutter is S-U-T-T-E-R. And I'm an independent public safety consultant. I work with Tom Nesbitt.
Okay, any questions from the board?
Are you gonna review the questions that we sent, or is this just for our own personal use?
Sure. If you want us to go through those, the questions that were submitted to us.
Yes, yes, go ahead, go through those.
Okay. So we were submitted a group of questions from the commissioners, and the responses that we came up with that provide the answers were from the evidence that we reviewed and the documentation, and on the audit findings, supplemental reports, treasury letters, and sheriff's office records. And so one of the questions is how, and we've touched on some of these, but we'll go a little bit deeper into them, is how widespread is the supplanting issue. And the audit and supplemental narrative confirm that supplanting has occurred across several expense categories, and specifically the uniforms, the routine patrol, vehicle maintenance, utilities, cell phones, and general software were identified as operating budget items and properly supported with forfeiture funds. Treasury compliance review further concluded that $762,000 so many dollars was expended on non-qualifying officer salaries, reinforcing the supplanting concern, is what the audit showed. Another question is almost $500,000 in equipment was flagged. Were these expenses allowable, and where is the equipment? The audit flagged $499,468.80 in equipment expenditures for closer review. While some of the equipment may be allowable under equitable sharing rules, documentation was incomplete, and inventory control weakness was noted, and several items lacked sufficient records tying them to drug enforcement education purposes. A full physical inventory reconciliation is required, and what we would recommend. What processes can be implemented to track payments more effectively? The Sheriff's Office currently uses spreadsheets and invoice coding, but lacks a purchase order system. We would recommend that implementing a purchase order system for all expenditures, requiring the purpose statements with each claim, and adopting quarterly fund board reviews with minutes as well. The next question is, who is in control of spending and oversight? Currently, invoices are coded by the Senior Operations Manager, approved by Captains Melby and Borges for general funds, and by the Task Force Officer Swycord for drug fund claims. However, oversight is fragmented and lacks centralized accountability, and the sheriff remains obviously the ultimate responsible person for that, and we think that more oversight is probably needed. Next question is, County Drug Law Enforcement and Education Fund Board, is this shield and scale? Is the question. And the answer is yes. Under Nebraska statute, Each county maintains a drug law enforcement and education fund board comprised of the county attorney and 3 law enforcement representatives. In Seward County, this function is commonly referred to as a shield and scale. The next question. Are items like LPR software, trackers, cell phones considered supplanting? Yes, when used for general operations rather than drug enforcement, they would be. The audit identified these technology expenditures as lacking sufficient documentation to establish a drug enforcement nexus. When used for routine operations, they constitute supplanting. The next question. Can Treasury funds support SRO positions, and who pays for non-SRO positions? Ours. Treasury guidance permits use of equitable sharing funds for SRO salaries only for the portion of time spent in school-related duties. The Sheriff's Office did not maintain the documentation to separate those duties from general patrol, which created compliance violations. Thus, the general fund should cover non-SOR time, and Treasury has already found that the $762,000 in impressible salaries largely tied to this issue. Next question. Is the $858,563.67 flagged between 7/1/23 and 4/3/25 wasteful spending or supplanting? The flag amount represents 68.2% of the total expenditures reviewed. Many items were routine budgetary expenses rather than enhancements supporting the finding of supplanting. Without clear purpose documentation, these are at high risk of being deemed impermissible. Next question. Has forfeiture become a budget substitute? Yes. Both the audit and the interviews that we conducted indicate reliance on forfeiture funds to pay for recurring budget items and salaries, substituting for general funds. Next question. Are the funds managed ethically and effectively? While no fraud was found, the lack of documentation, routine expenses, and treasuries on the do not spend designation indicate that management has not met the total effective use of the standards that are required. But again, there was no fraud found. Does the board have authority to require future recommendations? Yes, the board, as the approving authority for claims, has the power to impose policies, require documentation, and establish oversight procedures. Next question. Should the board have had greater oversight since inception? Yes, lack of board oversight contributed to systemic misuse. Federal and state law require reporting and oversight by local authorities. Does the board have the right to see DOJ Treasury correspondence? The answer is yes. As a governing body approving claims, the board is entitled to review all related correspondence to properly fulfill the oversight of the fiduciary. Is the Sheriff's Office currently in compliance with equitable sharing rules? The answer is no. The Sheriff's Office is in a do not spend status due to the Treasury determination of $762,504.32 in impermissible salary expenditures. Compliance cannot be certified until repayment is completed and corrective actions implemented. That's all the questions that were submitted.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions from the board based on that?
Just a comment. If we've already started, let's say, to begin the process, I know Commissioner Carrick and I have met with Sheriff Vance, and we're working through the process of establishing a PO process. I'm gonna sit here and say I've been here 6 years, and ignorance sometimes is bliss and sometimes it isn't. And I was frankly not aware of everything as a commissioner that I should have been aware of when it comes to the oversight aspect of this. So that's on me. I'm not gonna speak for the other 4, but that's on me. And the bottom line here is, based on conversations that Commissioner Carrick and I have had with the sheriff, we have an agreement, kind of in principle anyway, going forward to establish some kind of a process. But I want to go a step further with the committee. I was not aware totally of what Shield and Scale was. I knew who was part of that. I know they meet monthly. And I was thinking, well, not totally aware that maybe they should have been the committee that we, as a board, we bring these expenses to that Shield and Scale meeting and say, hi, this is what we want to spend this month. We would ask you to review these and give your blessing as to whether or not they're appropriate expenditures. Would that be adequate documentation and adequate oversight? It's not going to solve all of the issues that you point out here, but I think it's a good step forward. Agree or disagree with that, sir?
I think it's a great step forward on that, but
Can I-
also,
Sorry, can I interrupt on that? Okay, so just for clarification, the drug board meets after the Shield and Scale. The Shield and Scale is basically a meeting, I can invite anybody, but it's just local law enforcement that we meet on a monthly basis. It's not a public meeting, and we go over issues, laws, concerns. It's just basically a get-together by law enforcement so that we can communicate. So it's not necessarily always the same people, and it's not I don't know if it basically wouldn't be practical for that group. I mean, we have 911 come sometimes, we have State Patrol, we have York sometimes comes, and it's just hey, this is what's going on in the law. Let's keep our communication. If there's some concerns in the county, it's just basically a law enforcement.
So Shield and Scale is separate from the drug board.
Correct. It just happens that we have a
Meet
lot
at
of the
the same
same
time.
people. So we meet at Shield and Scale at noon, and then generally our public meeting for the drug board is at 1:30
So
usually,
is that a
1:15.
public meeting that has to be posted?
The
drug
drug
board?
board is a public meeting. It's posted every month.
Once a month?
And then there's an agenda. It's open, subject to the Open Meetings Act. The Shield and Scale is not. It's just all of our law enforcement gets together. So it's the same people, like the sheriff and a lot of his staff come to that meeting.
So then if a
Milford's
couple of
there.
commissioners wanted to participate, we would be welcome to that meeting or not?
With the Shield and Scale.
No, the drug board.
Oh yeah, it's open. It's an open meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Very good.
yeah, and you can look at the minutes. We keep minutes. It's just like no different than your meeting.
And I can provide a little bit of clarity on that. So, in my former life, I was a state patrol captain, and so I was on the drug board for Cass, Douglas, and Sarpy counties. Typically, how those work is you have a representative, your county attorney has a representative that is kind of the chair of the board. You have a representative from state patrol, a representative from the county, and then you have, if you have municipality police, you have a representative from their office on there as well. And those are typically, with the exception of maybe Douglas County, you're not dealing with the volume of seizures at the state level that you're dealing with in these federal funds. So, the expenditures there are, usually smaller ticket items that are debated, and then, we vote on whether to spend it now or spend it later, or however that may work. But it's typically, you're typically dealing with a lot less funding and a lot lesser items in those particular meetings. Most of them meet quarterly. I think by statute, they have to meet at least once annually.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else?
Sure. So I did receive from Mr. Nesbitt, I did receive a policy that he had created and a resolution and everything. And I'm also waiting, I have some information coming from Lancaster County as far as how they proceed through this with their sheriff's department. So what I'm going to do, I'm waiting to get everything together, and I'll send it out to the board so we can put it on the agenda and discuss it. And possibly I'd like to get with Commissioner Zabraki first after I send everything out, so we can kind of make a template maybe. And that way everybody doesn't have to sift through everything and have maybe a little bit more direction. But so we'll have the policy that we created, the policy that Mr. Nesbitt's team created, plus whatever Lancaster County can give me. How this came about is I was talking with Sheriff Vance. He said that Todd Duncan from NERMA was in town, and I told him I wanted to meet with him, but I didn't get an opportunity to meet with him. But Todd did call me Daryl and I happened to be here going over claims, so we had a conversation with Todd. And he had suggested going to Lancaster County because he had created these documents. So right now, that's kind of what I'm waiting on, and once I get that, then I'm gonna bring everything to Daryl and then to the board.
Okay. Mike, it's only fair you're here. Would you like to say anything in regards to the audit or on behalf of the sheriff's department about anything that was said with the information that was shared? Be come forward, sorry. And you can just grab the microphone if that's easier.
I don't think it's working.
No, it's not, never mind.
I'll just try and
Wishful
talk loud.
thinking.
The only comment I made, and I may have misunderstood Mr. Nesbitt and Mr.
Sutter, yeah.
Sutter. The LPRs, they said we didn't have documentation on the connection to the drug nexus. The LPRs are only used, they're not used by the general patrol cars. They're only used for the criminal interdiction team. So that's the nexus to the drugs for the license plate readers. That was the only thing. I didn't know whether I understood Mr. Nesbitt and Matt good enough. But that's the nexus. Those LPRs are not used on a regular patrol vehicle.
I actually had that question written down when you were sharing that. So it sounds like the challenge is that there's not documentation that's leading or linking the two together. So in this instance, when we know the LPRs are used specifically for that, what sort of documentation would you recommend to link the two together? Could you guys just give us an example?
I think the proper way to document with that would be to just document the number of cases that those are generating, or to have some type of data that shows that how many hours those are out on the interstate every year, the number of plate reads, the number of those cases that are tied back to drug investigations. You know, again, I'm sure a lot of these expenditures are being used out on the interstate every day. There's just a critical lack of documentation there outlining that for auditing purposes.
Would sufficient documentation on the LPRs be a way, as Sheriff Vance outlined, they're only used on the interdiction team anyway. Could you tie that to a unit number and a particular deputy that is working with the idea that we know that, let's say, those 2 or 3 vehicles are dedicated to that function?
Correct.
So there shouldn't be any reason for them to be anywhere else, so to speak.
Correct, yes.
So that would be a sufficient way to document this as well, then, correct?
Yes, I agree.
So same thing within the other things. What I'm hearing is we have potentially an officer who is working solely interdiction. That's his job description. That's what he's doing. He's the only person that uses the vehicle. We know we brought up a taser or a uniform. How do we link all of those things? Is there one way to link all of the uses by the interdiction? Because what you were saying sounds very like a lot of, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that.
Sure.
I'm just saying to
Yeah.
simplify that.
Well, I think that how most agencies do it, or what I guess what I would call the industry standard, is just on an officer's timesheet when they're submitting the hours that they're working every day. There's a code entry for drug interdiction work, and then you can tie back to every piece of equipment that officer has issued. Here's the number of hours that it was utilized doing drug interdiction work. So essentially, it's kind of like. It's kind of like how we would track to find out if somebody goes over to South Dakota and registers a vehicle because it's cheaper there. We have ways of tracking how much that vehicle spends its time in Nebraska as to whether or not they're skirting the system. So
I hear what you're saying.
That's probably a bad analogy.
No,
but
it's not a bad analogy, but I guess what I'm asking is again, it's my understanding that individuals who are out there, those that have actual job titles that are within the interdiction, 100% of their time is spent doing that. And it says that basically. I mean, I think there are situations where potentially they don't, so I think I'm wrong. But the majority of their time is spent doing that. Their vehicles are for that, their uniforms, their equipment, everything else. I'm trying to say, to document on a timesheet, okay, I used my vehicle for 100% of these hours as a check, check boxes. How do we simplify that?
I agree with what you're saying, but the problem is those officers are being classified as SROs, and they're not.
I'm not talking about the SROs.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm talking about the actual interdiction officers. So there's some full-time, part-time individuals, and their work is solely dedicated to that. So if we know that, and that's the equipment that they're utilizing, that's what I'm saying. How do we, is there not a simplified way to say, if it is via the timesheet, here's my timesheet, and maybe it's some sort of attachment that says I used my vehicle like 100% of the time for
Yeah.
this, and in the uniform, the equipment, et cetera, would that suffice as
Yeah,
documentation?
I think that is
Okay.
sufficient documentation if that exists, through.
It doesn't currently, but,
Yeah, through the
Yes.
course of the audit, we didn't see that.
okay, got it. That's
But I
helpful.
think that would suffice.
Okay,
If there was, let's say, an inventory spreadsheet that listed equipment, I'll say per deputy, and we know that, I'll say, 3 of these deputies are interdiction, would that kind of a spreadsheet suffice as adequate documentation?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would think that if you're issuing somebody a patrol unit with all of the standard equipment in that documentation of that vehicle and that inventory would be sufficient, as long as we can show that that officer is out doing that work the
Got it.
majority of their time.
that's helpful. Mike, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to clarify, you brought up about for 2 of the cell phones, the data usage. Those 2 cell phones are the 2 deputies that use their cell phone for the LPRs. That's why their data is so high. Because when they're checking on the LPRs or submitting it, the LPR information in there, they're using that data. That's why the only 2 cell phones that we had were that high on data usage, was the 2 interdiction cell phones.
So what do you use the cell phones and not the tough books?
Well, they use the cell phones when they're not with the tough book.
Oh, all right.
You know, if they'll get a hit on one of the LPRs where a plate has been entered in what they call the hot list, and they're not with their tough book, they use their cell phones to do all that stuff on.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Sheriff Vance, so you're saying the tough books have their own connectability to the internet then? So you're saying the cell phones aren't being used for Wi-Fi for the tough book then?
No, each patrol car that has a tough book, they have an air card.
Okay, that's what
Yeah, they have
I
an
couldn't think of the terminology, so air card.
air card, yes.
So every tough book has an air card, but yet you're saying that the data on the cell phone on these 2 interdiction officers is high because they're not using their tough book.
Right, they'll use their cell phones because they're tracking data all the time. If they're not in their car where their tough book's at,
Where would they be?
or they could be in the office, they could be at home when they get a hot list alert.
Okay,
And then they have to, call the other deputies.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Saras.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
if I may, I don't know, again, just breaking it down to hours worked, the usage of approximately, 1 to 2 gigs of data every 4 hours. Not saying that's not possible, but I would strongly challenge that.
so I have an idea, at least for one of them, that we've already visited and we've already corrected, and that was there was an individual who was utilizing the phone for both personal and workplace. But again, that was a misunderstanding. I think that predates Mike. It was something that was put in place by the previous sheriff. But I remember reviewing those cell phone bills, and the one individual had an extremely high usage, and I had questioned that, and the answer was, of course, that they were using it for both personal and county work. So that has been rectified. That is not happening anymore. He does not.
Correct.
That individual does not have. He has 2 separate phones. So I think, at least for one of them, I think that that's what the usage was linked to.
Correct.
I don't know about the other one.
Yeah, I'm not saying everyone is misusing their cell phone, but there were clearly some that it would have been very difficult to, during a normal work week.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're on call 24/7,
Right.
some of those numbers would have been hard to hit.
Okay. Other questions or comments, Mike?
No, you've already said it, we've already
Okay,
clarified,
Okay.
they don't use their funds for personal use anymore, so.
right, right. Okay, if there are no other questions from the board, I think that that's it.
Okay.
We really appreciate you coming, thanks for the review and the
Thank you.
information.
Thank you so much.
Does anyone need a break? Everybody good? Okay. So the next item is information regarding, or an information update regarding the meeting with the Treasury Department. Mike, do you wanna, now that you have a seat to take? Okay.
So I just want to clarify a few things, and in relationship to the meeting that was held with the Treasury, the intention of requesting that meeting was to obtain information from the Treasury Department related to documents and communications in order for the board to determine what the county needs to do in order to feel confident to sign the ESAC and move forward. My intention was to better understand what has happened and have all necessary information to ensure that we are in compliance with the Treasury Department through the Equitable Sharing Guide. So on, it would have been, I believe, Thursday, it was September 11th, we held a Zoom meeting with 3 members from the Treasury Department and myself, Commissioner Amick, Wendy Elston, and Barb Armstead from the Seward County Attorney's Office. So there were a lot of questions that were asked in relationship to kind of where we were at, documents that we have or have not received at this point. And then information was shared at that time from members of the Treasury Department that included that the compliance review was initiated on November 1st, 2022, and that a letter was sent to the sheriff at that time. Additional questions in relationship to that letter were that the review focused on all expenditures, not just salaries. So the board at that time did not have a copy of that initial letter. We do have that at this time. Other items to note were that there were, in fiscal year 23 and 24, there were additional expenditures that were flagged. The Treasury Department has reported that they are continuing to review expenditures and is planning to complete their review by 12/31 of 25. Previously, it was shared that they were gonna be done in October, but we did clarify that, and they're not planning to be done with their review until the end of the actual calendar year. Any changes that were made in the updated 2024 Equitable Sharing Guide were not retroactive to the previous years. And the new guide went into effect March of 2024. So the new guide only pertains to items from March of 2024 moving forward. Anything prior to that was the previous Equitable Sharing Guide. So there were no retroactive expenditures as had been discussed previously. And we also had questions related to the ESAC that had been submitted in 2024 for the request that was made from the Treasury to include the amount of $267,704.23 that was supposed to be listed under other income, as well as the corresponding explanation on page 2 that states to correct for errors identified during a Treasury compliance review. She is continuing to review that ESAC, and then the ESAC one was sent from the Sheriff's Department. They will be reviewing those documents and get back to us. To this date, nothing has been received. And according to the legal counsel that was present for Treasury, the letters and exchanges between the Treasury Department and the Sheriff's Department are a matter of public record, and they do not see a reason that they should be withheld from the board as the governing body of the county. And they did review letters and correspondence both from the Department of Treasury and the Seward County Sheriff's Office, redacted any necessary information and sent those. The Treasury is continuing to review expenditures through July 31st, 2025, as funds were spent after Seward County Sheriff's Office was placed in a do not spend status. We currently owe an additional $33,212.39 for non-conforming use of funds, and they are withholding essentially $729,291.93 for disbursement until they have completed the compliance review. Based on the information, the Seward County Sheriff's Office will continue to be in a do not spend until these issues are resolved. And we have asked that the board be included in any additional communications from the Treasury Department. The Treasury will be reviewing this request as well and will provide us with an answer. So I don't know, Misty, if you have any additional information to
I
share.
have just a few
Wendy?
points of clarification, on that end of year review, and again, this is just my interpretation, there's several people there. It was a request from them, because their year end was end of August. The statement that was made was they are very busy trying to wrap up their year end, which is why they're basically saying, hey, we need a little bit of extra time to then go back at the end of the fiscal year to look again. So that's kind of how that's how I interpreted that, and that's the statement that was made from them. And that was Jackie that made that, that statement. And then regarding that 2024 ESAC and then the information that she was saying, there's one point of clarification that we asked, and that was there was something that was supposed to be included in the 2024 ESAC that she was unclear if it was or was not. And if it was not, then we obviously need to provide that to them with our 2025 ESAC. And to my knowledge, she has not replied yet. She has not confirmed whether or not we gave that to her or we didn't give that to her. So I do know that we're waiting to hear back on that so that we can make sure to get her whatever it is that is sort of pending. And that would be, obviously it was for 2024, but we would submit it with 2025 to sort of check that box off. And then it was my understanding that once the statute was provided from the state, which it was, that the board would be included in the communications moving forward so that we are equal partners in this and we know sort of what's going on as it's coming in. As far as the repayment of funds, I did actually ask the question, can we just repay the additional funds and go back into basically compliance? She said no. So she said it would not be advisable to do that. I understand why, but she did say they would look again at the end of the year to see if we couldn't finish that, or finish taking the $33,000. And again, I told you why the end of the year, which is a request on their behalf. It wasn't from the county. So that's just the clarification I have. Wendy, I'm sure you have some things. No?
No, the only thing I can remember, and I didn't bring my notes, but I thought that the new do not disband was only on Treasury.
It is.
That is what I heard, yeah.
So
We did
justice
confirm.
is free to be spent.
Yeah. Yep. Any questions about the information that was shared?
Well, I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
You know, I don't understand why I wasn't contacted about this virtual meeting when this was created by Homeland Security. It's the Sheriff's Department's program. And I feel that I and my staff should have been contacted about this virtual meeting. We should have been present. You know,
I can share something again, I'm just one person. I will say this was not my meeting. I was invited to this meeting. I did make that recommendation, but it is not my meeting. From my perspective, I think I tried several things. I conferred with legal to see if there was a way that, say, the whole board could participate, to include the sheriff's office, because I felt like it would be helpful to just have everybody hearing the same information at one time. But the information provided in return was that was not possible. So for perspective on that end, I did make that effort, but it was not possible. It's not helpful.
well, I want to thank several of the board members. You know, we've been working together, trying to get this a better process, and I think we're on the right track there. I do appreciate the professionalism from the board members. I just don't agree that this meeting should have been set up. You know, I know county policy hasn't been followed by one of the commissioners, and I don't appreciate that, because I'm told, and I've heard the board tell other county officials, we need to follow policy, and that's fine, you know, but everybody needs to go by that policy,
Can you tell me
including all the board members.
specifically what the policy you're referring to is?
Well, it's obvious that Commissioner Hain has been investigating us for a long time.
Okay, so remember at the beginning I said, we're just gonna keep this productive and
You're
we're just,
right.
we're gonna, so let's just talk about the call. I think, you know, we've discussed some of those things in the past. I think everybody has acknowledged things, and it is my understanding that the board, we do want to work forward. We've made the acknowledgements, there was some oversight or some misinterpretation. We've adjusted the budget. Now I think our duty is to work together to make sure that we can get all of this resolved, right? So whether that's clarifying the information that needed to be on that report with Jackie, getting us out of the do not spend, regardless though it sounds like that's not gonna happen until the end of the year, and I think that was the biggest thing, was okay, like how do we get ourselves out of this as far as Treasury is concerned, because to your point, it's just Treasury. And that was kind of my understanding of it, so.
Right, and I understand that too, and I agree with you.
Okay.
You know, my thing with trying to get the ESAC done is so we could still use justice. You know, we all understand that Treasury's not gonna be until the end of the year, December 31st, I think
Right.
she said. You know, and you're right, you know, we need to move on and let the past go.
So as far as the ESAC, and I'm just speaking for myself because there are 4 other people here, I would be fine signing it if we adjust the budget but we need clarification from Jackie to make sure that we're giving them what they need to make sure that it's, you know, fulfilled on their end. I'm not trying to drag anything out. The sooner that we could do that, the better. But I will say I was CC'd in emails afterwards where Reagan was following up with her and asking her for that additional information. Did we do it? Did we not do it? Do we need to do it? And I even asked her yesterday if there had been any response. There had not. So I'm assuming she will likely continue to follow up with her to just get that point of
Well,
clarification.
the person that can most likely answer that question is Blair.
Well, I'm not sure, because again, and maybe it's my ignorance here, but I was not 100% clear on what it was that was left out, and maybe you can clarify that she was looking to see if we did submit or didn't submit. And I don't think it was necessarily something that was on the report so much as included with the report. Did I misunderstand that?
It's supposed to be included within the ESAC.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's supposed to be listed, so on the document, there's the area that says other income. So that money was supposed to be listed in there. And then there was also supposed to be a notation that was made, that it was made in error, basically. So I'll go
So you're
back
talking
to,
about the 24 ESAC?
yeah.
Yeah.
There was, okay, exactly what wasn't included in the 24 ESAC? Because I'm a little
What I'm
confused.
trying to figure out.
So according to the documentation that had been provided in the letters from the Treasury Department that you have, it said that on the next to be filed ESAC, that it needed to include the amount of $267,704.23 listed under other income, as well as the corresponding explanation on page 2 that states to correct for errors identified during a Treasury compliance review. Now, all of this information is in those letters. And so when I asked that question, my question was, if it wasn't placed on the 2024 ESAC, do we put it on the 2025 ESAC to account because it wasn't on there? Because the ESAC that was brought to the board last year, Sherry gave me a copy of it, the one that was signed by Commissioner Omig, it did not have that information on there. And so they're checking to make sure what needs to be on there and what has been filed with their office and what hasn't.
From my understanding, from what you just said, that lady didn't know whether it was or whether it was not on there.
That's true. That's how I understood it, and that's why,
I'm reviewing it.
I think you asked, was it Melissa, is that the legal counsel? She asked Melissa, and Melissa was like, I can't answer that, it has to go to Jackie, so then she followed up separately with Jackie to try to get that additional information. So, if Blair has information that shows that that was submitted, I think that could be helpful. Definitely, we could pass it along to Jackie and say, this is, you know, we did this, this is documentation showing that. But I would suspect that she will reply, and I'm thinking she would probably reply this week. I think
hope
that
so.
first follow-up was Friday, which was a little more than a week. So that is where I'm at. I'm like, let's just provide them what they want, sign it, you know, with the corrected amounts, and then move forward as far as the ESAC is concerned. But the other, obviously, we're kind of in a holding pattern.
And for the record, if we can secure that amount and satisfy that federal request, I'm ready to support signing the ESAC, ready to go with it.
So this $267,000 that was not included in the 24 is, where does that come from then?
You're gonna have to go through the letter. We'll have to go through the letter as to what it was for. It's listed in there.
Well, I mean, does the money go back to Treasury then? I mean, or is that something they're gonna withhold from future?
It was
Drops?
more saying like that in.
Or
that-
was it just not tabulated in 24 in the right column?
Well, Blair wasn't even here, so,
Yeah.
I mean, so some of that's gonna be,
Right.
she's gonna have to go
The
through
only thing
that.
I can do
And I think what it-
is look at last year's to see if it was in there, if
Yeah.
it's not, I can, if you send me the email, if I don't have any letters, I can add it to this one and see if it's.
What, I don't understand.
She's saying, can you send her the letter to say specifically, or just, maybe just tell her specifically what it is that needed to be included so she could look for that?
They have all of those, your department has all of those letters. So I would say, you know, check with the sheriff or whoever sent them to Scott, because they have all of the letters that are in there.
Can we send to Blair this, what you just repeated, that we needed to include that under the other income and?
It's in the letter. It's all listed in that letter.
Okay, I will try to look through the letters, and I will try to send you what I find based on those letters, or highlight the spot for that to try my best, okay? Okay. And then if you do find any information regarding that, if you could pass it on to Reagan, because she is the point of contact right now that's going back and forth. And it is my understanding that another meeting might occur, so I'm gonna just defer back to you on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to invite you to a follow-up meeting, but there was a lot of, we had 1 hour, that's what the Treasury had granted us to be able to meet. We couldn't meet with any more commissioners. I had reached out by phone conversation with Jackie, just trying to get this information. This is the process that she had asked me to go through. That's what I did. I followed that process. We had 1 hour to be able to ask these questions to get clarifying information, and that's what we did. It wasn't in an attempt to keep you out, it was in an attempt to, we've got 1 hour to find out from the Treasury where we're at, what do we need to do as a county in order to move forward, and that's where it was, and that's where it's at.
I know Blair can seek clarification. That other income that was put in there, they're referring to the reimbursements. And we had to set up a separate account to reimburse when Treasury and DOJ sends overtime reimbursements. You have to reimburse, they had to set up a separate account with Sherry. And that, you have to reimburse out of a separate account. You can't reimburse straight out of 2412 or 2414. So that's what all that's about. It's just that we were getting reimbursement checks and reimbursing straight out of those two, so they had to set up that separate account. So that's what that's talking about.
Okay.
So the reimbursements are the 267,000?
Yes, sir.
And I do remember some reference to those accounts in the separate account in that section too, so. Okay, so that is basically what was discussed in that meeting. I will look for I'll just screenshot it and try to email it to you. I will CC Reagan on it so she can be a part of that discussion. And then I think if we can just get the confirmation from Jackie, we can at least try to move forward on the ESAC, knowing that really, as far as the do not spend, we're kind of stuck until they finish their review again at the end of the year. Does everybody agree with that?
Yep.
You guys on the same page?
Pardon me?
You're on the same, you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
We're all in the same spot? Okay, I just wanna clarify that we all are in agreement. Other than that, unless the board has something else, I think that's pretty much it. Do you wanna say anything else? Do you wanna say something, Wendy?
I'm done.
The letter you're referencing to, can you resend that to me then? Because
I don't know if I still have it. I got it from you. You're the one who sent it to me.
okay, I'll look for it then.
Yeah,
I can resend it to you if you need me to.
Because you keep referencing to that, and I'm just, I wanna read it again, because I'll be honest with you, I don't remember all this stuff. I think it might have something to do with age, and so I don't, when you're talking about this letter specifically, I would have liked to have it in front of me.
So it was also referenced as part of the letter that I read when the ESAC was brought back around.
Okay.
And in that letter that I gave you a copy of also, it has the specific date of the letter, the heading of the letter, it has all of that information in it. So I'm not withholding anything.
No, I'm not saying you
This is
are.
all
I'm not saying you're
information that you shared
withholding
with me
anything.
and,
I just,
okay.
not having it in front of me, not knowing where it's at, I mean, I could try to look right now, but, you are pretty versed with it, that's why I was asking if you,
Yeah,
okay.
it was one of the compliance review, the actual letters of their findings.
Okay, no, I don't have anything else.
okay,
Tim?
either of you?
And everybody got the email that I gave Commissioner Picard, that made him a copy of it. I think I emailed and forwarded the email to everybody else about the drop that they're holding.
155,000 or something?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I got that.
And that's Treasury to confirm, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you guys for coming, and we will work to move forward. I'm gonna ask again, does anybody need a quick break? Okay. So we'll go to item number 8. Actually, let's just take a quick 2-minute break so we can give John time to come back. So we'll recess until 10:45.